So the Panthers are on the clock.
Yep.
Let's do this thing. We're going to follow it along. Mock Draft Simulator over at PFF.com. The Carolina Panthers are on the clock for our viewers, and we've given them the choice of Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, or other. So go ahead, make your vote. I'm going to cast a vote too.
And you'll be able to follow along using PFF's Mock Draft Sim, PFF.com/mock. That'll be on the screen the whole time if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening along, you're not going to have that. Or, in fact, the chat box. So, it's more of a by proxy experience for you.
It is, but you're listening, and you're listening to what your colleagues are going to come up with. So we've mentioned before, the favorite to go number one overall is now Bryce Young. It is no longer CJ Stroud. Mm-hmm. Is that what we're going to be hearing in less than 2 weeks here, Sam, that Bryce Young is the number one overall pick?
It's starting to look that way. If you sort of listen to the show all the way back at the Combine, I think it was, Mike Renner was on at the time, and his theory was essentially, we're going to do this big song and dance, we're going to do a big loop, and we're going to talk ourselves into everybody at number one, and ultimately the NFL is going to come back around to Bryce Young is just the best quarterback. He just is. Yes, he's tiny. It's concerning. There's no way around that. It's worrisome, to use Mike's word, but he's the best quarterback. And eventually the NFL will decide that as well, and he will be the guy going number one overall. It's starting to look like that's exactly what's happened. We went through a phase of talking ourselves into CJ Stroud at number one. We went through a phase of Anthony Richardson's the highest upside. He's the guy to shoot for. And we're going to end up settling on Bryce Young's the safest. He's the best. He just is. His tape is so much better than everybody else's. When in doubt, lean on that. So he goes number one.
You know what I was thinking this week that's really going to happen?
No.
Just before the draft, Aaron Rodgers news. Something's going to happen.
Yeah, remember he broke his initial thing the hour before the draft last time.
Yeah.
2 times ago.
Schefter's sitting on something.
Right.
Aaron Rodgers is having second thoughts about going to New York. Breaking news at 7 o'clock here on Mock, on NFL Draft Night 1.
Yeah, the entire pre-draft show was about Aaron Rodgers and would he get traded, and that didn't happen. Now, when he's supposed to get traded, something will happen. He will announce something, and the entire pre-draft show will be about Aaron Rodgers again.
All right, well, the pick is in. I think it's pretty straightforward here. Other got 4% of the votes. We got some outsiders in there.
Good for Other.
But it is Bryce Young with 52% of our viewers' votes. So Bryce Young will be the pick for the Carolina Panthers, according to the viewers of the PFF NFL podcast. That puts the Houston Texans up on the clock. And Sam, so we have to have CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis. I would put the 3 quarterbacks and Will Anderson on here for the Texans. There is some smoke. There's some smoke around Will Anderson, right? Wow, how'd you guys do that so fast? Or you just know? You guys just knew. Stroud, Richardson, Levis, or Anderson. There's a little bit of smoke about the Texans because here's what people think we know, that the Texans love Bryce Young. Mm-hmm. And that throughout this whole process, if it was Stroud first, Young second, Texans are happy. Didn't matter that they won a game later in the season. They were going to take Bryce Young anyway, and they're all good. However, now that the Texans might be in on Bryce Young, the Panthers might be in on Bryce Young, the Texans maybe don't love Stroud to the point where maybe they've got pick 12. Maybe they're finagling some other options. How do I get Will Anderson and then get Stroud later or get someone else? What other options are there? So there's a little bit of smoke around that for the Texans.
Yeah, well, there's been talk for a while that the Texans might not actually go quarterback at number 2. That had been a thing for ages. And when it first came out, it was kind of like, well, that's ridiculous. How could you not draft a quarterback at number 2? And then I think some more meat got put on that bone, which is maybe Bryce Young is their guy, and they think this is a 1 quarterback class. I mean, we've said this before, right? This is, as much as the consensus board, I think, has all of these guys pretty high up, all 4 quarterbacks ranked highly on the consensus board, because there's such a variety of styles and types of player and types of personality. Every NFL team is not going to view this as 4 quarterback strong. It's going to view it as 2 quarterback strong or 1 quarterback strong. And if that guy is gone, what's the point? I think we would take the approach of you don't have a quarterback, therefore you need a quarterback. Take the quarterback, even if you don't think there's a good chance that they work out, because everybody is bad at this. So if you're wrong, it's a good thing. If you're right, okay, but you took the chance anyway. Whereas I think NFL teams view it as, we just don't think this guy has a chance of working out, so we're just setting the pick on fire. There's no point in drafting a guy at number 2 if you don't believe he can be a franchise quarterback going forward. And at this point, everybody is chasing that true special talent, not just the guy that can come in and be, Jared Goff for a few years. So I think there's a very real chance, if the Texans do believe that this draft is Bryce Young deep and nothing else, they would move out of that pick or draft Will Anderson.
Man, that would be...
But it would make them look ridiculous for winning that game late.
Yeah, for winning that game late. I mean, it was Lovie Smith did it. He's gone. It's Nick Caserio in year 3. I mean, I always think that matters, right? Like when the 49ers a few years ago, they were the ones who didn't draft a quarterback early when they just got there. It was Kyle Shanahan just got there. John Lynch just got there, right? And I was thinking at that time, they have a 6-year contract. You don't have to just draft a quarterback. Maybe they should have drafted Mahomes, though, in hindsight. That would have been smart. But you don't just have to force a quarterback. The Texans are kind of both, right? And Nick Caserio's in year 3, but it's the year 1 of DeMeco Ryans. But, yeah, you're right. I mean, if they think Bryce Young is a potential top 8 guy and Stroud is just a starter, right? That could sway them to try to do something else and say, okay, we'll get Will Anderson plus another just a starter, which could be Will Levis later on, and take a shot on him. Because
it also, by the way, feels like you could, if you know that you're going to be terrible, which you're going to know pretty early in the season. Like, there were a few teams that had an inkling that they were chasing the number 1 overall pick at some point last season, quite early on. You should probably hurry up the scouting process on the top quarterbacks so that information, which one of these guys is the best, should be had by week 18, And
yeah,
you could say...
but I think, but you can't do the offseason process. They've got their film grades by then. They have an idea on film.
I don't know
the things that they're learning now are S2 tests and sleepovers and all that. You got to have a sleepover with the guy, right? You have to have those 12-hour meetings. You got to play Madden with him, make sure he understands.
But the decision makers are not done with their film part at that stage. Like, those guys barely touch the scouting process until way after the season's done.
Yeah, maybe.
That's the kind of time where it's, all right, we're headed for the number 1 overall pick, maybe. The tape has been done from the scouting. Let's check in. Let's check in with the scouts and find out what this quarterback class looks like. Because if it's 1 deep, we probably want to make sure that we pull all the starters for this Week 18 game the way Philadelphia did. So to ensure that
next year we could see some tank jobs. Because Caleb Williams is going to come across as special as it gets. I don't think Caleb Williams will get this best prospect since label. It'll just be kind of like he's the next Mahomes. That's what it's not going to be he's better than Trevor Lawrence as a prospect. Maybe it will be, but it'll just be, wow, this is the closest thing to Mahomes with all the things he does. Or it's Mahomes with more speed or something ridiculous. But it might be true. Not that he'll be better, but he'll be, traits-wise comparable. All right, C.J. Stroud, he's the pick for the Houston Texans. 52% for our viewers here. That puts the Arizona Cardinals on the clock at 3. Now, can we do trades, Sam?
No, because it's just too awkward.
That's way too much, right? So we're going to we'll stick with our picks. So who do we have available for Arizona? It has to be the 2 big defensive players on our board here, Jalen Carter and Will Anderson. Mm-hmm. Those guys certainly for sure. Then do we go Devin Witherspoon and Tyree Wilson? Because Tyree Wilson is in play in reality.
So the question is going to be, this is a predictive mock draft rather than a what should the chat do?
Because it's more predictive than anything. I don't even know if I would go quarterback for the Cardinals if that's what you're...
No, what I'm saying, though, is that we should be using the consensus board for these things rather than the PFF board. So
I'm on the consensus board.
Christian Gonzalez is the number 1 consensus corner, is he not?
True. You're right. So the next few players on the consensus board, we have Will Anderson, Anthony Richardson, quarterback, of course, Jalen Carter, Christian Gonzalez, and Tyree Wilson. So let's do that then. That's fine. Take out Devin Witherspoon. So we'll go Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, Christian Gonzalez, and Tyree Wilson as your 4. and we'll put that up on the clock. Cardinals, what are their needs? Well, everything on the defensive side of the ball, pretty much everything offensively. They're 2 years removed from having a pretty solid roster, right? An offense that was coming together. The offensive line has enough pieces there, but they still probably need a little bit of help. DeAndre Hopkins looking for a trade or potential release. So he didn't get released yet, right? Hopkins?
No.
Right. So they need some help. But everybody's expecting defense, Cardinals to just grab the best defensive player on the board if they can't trade out here.
Yeah. Obviously, trade makes the most sense, but absent of that, you probably are picking the first defender off the board at this stage.
The early returns are Will Anderson looking pretty good in the poll here. He's right over 64%. So we're this is chalk so far, right? This is what we would expect on draft night right now.
I guess the first, that number one pick is the thing that's still, I think, a little bit up in the air, whether it is Bryce Young, whether it's CJ Stroud, and that's going to determine how the rest of it goes. But we're taking trades off the board, which I think at this point, most people have a trade in the top 5, right? Most people have Arizona trading out or Houston trading out. There's some kind of trade happening in the top 5, and we're not doing that.
I'm trying to look for all of the props. So we'll get to number 4 in a minute here. The favorite to go number 4 for the Colts is Will Levis over Anthony Richardson. So that could end up being what we're looking at for the Colts here. Let's see what the Cardinals. We got over 130 votes in there. Looks like it's going to be Will Anderson.
67%. I think we can lock that.
I think we can call it. Can we get Kornacki on the phone here? Is this good enough? Is this strong enough to call here? We're calling Will Anderson for the Cardinals. Poll's complete here. Christian Gonzalez only got 6% of the vote. People don't like taking corners that high.
Not
go back 3. And last year we did see corners go 3 and 4. Derek Stingley and of course Sauce Gardner. So Cardinals go Will Anderson. That puts the Colts up on the clock. As far as the consensus board goes, Anthony Richardson and Will Levis both need to be up there at quarterback, and then we just put Jalen Carter and Christian Gonzalez on for this, or Tyree Wilson. Just throw some other defensive players, or do we just make it a 3-man race? It's 2 QBs and Jalen Carter.
Yeah, probably.
For the Colts.
It's not even. Is it even that?
It's just the 2 quarterbacks, right? They might trade down. This is where think about. Speaking of smoke here, there's a lot of smoke around Hendon Hooker being in the first round, and he has been linked to many teams. He's been linked to the Colts. He's been linked to the Vikings.
Yeah.
And it goes back to like if these teams actually have a top 2 quarterbacks, not a top 4. So there's a big 2 instead of a big 4. Do the Colts and some of these other teams who could draft a quarterback just say, okay, we don't want to take the next tier of quarterback. Or if we're going to take the next tier of quarterback, Hendon Hooker's in there. There's also a lot of people putting Hendon Hooker in their top 3.
Yeah.
There's more people doing this now. All I'm saying, I'm not saying that means it's true or that means like, all it means is if there are people out here, media land, doing this, some NFL teams are probably doing that too.
I don't know if that's true though. This feels like an abnormal draft for people wildly pushing like extreme views on certain players, and it's actually feels like a draft where I think the consensus board is a thing to lean on a lot relative to everything else out there if you want to actually predict what's going to happen. Timo Riska had an article today using Arif Hassan's consensus big board, which apparently is basically 80% capable of predicting any given pick in any year, and is stable all the way through the draft. So it's not like it's just good for the top 32 picks and then tails off. It's 80% down the entire draft. So using the consensus board is going to get you 80% of the way there in terms of predicting where these outliers are going to end up. So guys like Hendon Hooker, the consensus board is actually, I think, a pretty powerful tool in terms of predicting where these people are going to land. And he is, where is he? Outside of the top, certainly outside of the top 30. I actually can't even find him. How deep do you
I think the one I'm looking at.
62.
Yeah, the one
consensus big board.
I'm not using Arif's. I apologize. Arif, listener of the show. I'm at NFLmockdraftdatabase.com.
Huh.
Hooker's 39 now, though. There.
Yeah, well, he's 62 on Arif's, which is the one that's been shown to have an 80% strike rate. I don't know I don't know what the efficacy of the one you're using is, but
oh, I know this one's around year round here, and Arif just accumulates his.
Yeah, and that's probably why it's better.
What? That doesn't make any sense.
Of course it does.
All right, let's check the poll. 162 votes in. It's 55% for Anthony Richardson. I don't know if there's enough time for Will Levis to come back from a 10-point. You got to make up 10 points here.
No? It's not like basketball where that can happen in a couple of minutes.
They call a couple timeouts, hit a couple threes. Reggie Miller comes off the bench against the Knicks. Magic can happen. It can happen. But it looks like Anthony Richardson, he's moving away. He's up to 56%. It looks like it's going to be Anthony Richardson here for the Indianapolis Colts. Let's lock it in. Richardson to the Colts. As I said, on DraftKings right now, it's Will Levis. Here are the favorites to go number 4 for the Colts. Will Levis, then Will Anderson, then Anthony Richardson, then C.J. Stroud.
I would say that's the first surprise. I don't think that's a particularly common mock pick.
So there was a point in the mock draft or in the draft process where I thought, hey, Will Levis might be the guy that drops. Now I'm of the mind, as I said on the show and tweeted, it might be Anthony Richardson.
Jeremy Fowler had an article put out where he polled, what did he say it was, like 24 NFL execs of some variety or other that was on all these quarterbacks, and essentially was asking, how high could he go, how low could he go, and then generally talking about them. I found it pretty interesting, sort of the range, because the lowest anybody had Bryce Young was 2. So remember, there were a lot of bets we got in that, hey, Bryce Young's going to be the guy that falls. Teams are going to freak out over the size. He'll be the guy that drops. Nobody had him dropping lower than 2. So it was whatever happens if who goes number 1, Bryce Young is going 2. There was a little bit more of a range on C.J. Stroud, but he was pretty strong as well. But nobody had Levis dropping outside of the top 10, I think. Like, his floor was basically 10.
Yeah, I think Daniel Jeremiah first put out a mock that said, hey, what if he dropped to Tampa Bay, middle of the first or whatever it was. So anyway, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. So the Seattle Seahawks are on the clock after Anthony Richardson goes here. Do we put Will Levis as an option for them as well?
Yeah.
Just because? So we'll give him Will Levis as an option. You give him Hendon Hooker as an option.
No, stop it.
Jalen Carter, still on the board. Christian Gonzalez and Tyree Wilson.
All right. So I would say Levis, Jalen Carter, Tyree Wilson, and pick a 4th.
Gonzalez? I keep Gonzalez up there. They do need a corner opposite Tariq Woolen.
Yeah.
But because they really need pass rushers, the Seahawks are mostly mocked Tyree Wilson, Jalen Carter, or dropping Will Anderson. Those seem to be the most common mock draft picks here for Seattle.
Yep. Okay.
So that's the poll, right? We got that going. Jalen Carter, Tyree Wilson, Christian Gonzalez, and Will Levis, all available here for the Seattle Seahawks. Walt's already in with Jalen Carter at number 5. This is where's his mock draft? Walt.com or something? Is he Walter Football? Maybe he's Walter Football.
Seems unlikely.
It does seem unlikely. So Seattle Seahawks. Do we think they're going to be in the market for a quarterback? Probably not if it's the 4th option here.
Yeah, I don't. Maybe. They feel like a team that could be interested in Anthony Richardson. Like, he seems like I think a lot of teams would buy into this idea that he needs to sit for a year, even if I'm not sure I buy that myself. But he feels like a few teams that have a bridge quarterback, like a Geno Smith, could snag an Anthony Richardson, buy into the upside, buy into the fact that you don't need it to happen day one, and still absolutely be in that market. But if Richardson's gone, I don't think you want to do that with Will Levis. So, and you almost certainly don't want to do it with Hendon Hooker. So I'm not really buying that.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, like some people push back on me after my mock draft where it said, hey, you're the GM, I'm the GM, I'll make all the moves. And they said, well, Steve GM always says to pick all the quarterbacks, no matter what. Don't even care about your evaluations.
Right.
And there's
So you should be in Hendon Hooker at 5.
some truth. Just take quarterbacks.
He's the next one on my list. We need quarterbacks. Let's grab him.
Well, I would go Levis here if I was doing that. Going
Okay.
with that strategy.
Yeah. So after Levis is gone is when you would draft Hendon Hooker.
Yeah. All right, how's the poll looking here? I'm going to make my vote. Oh, it's another landslide. Here's what I'm curious about. Are our listeners going to be swayed by our Tyree Wilson analysis?
I doubt it.
He seems to be a consensus top 8 guy across the league. I think our listeners are going to be swayed. I think they're going to view Tyree Wilson as a mid-first guy. even though the PFF draft board has him in the top 8. It's just you and I that don't have him up there. All right, we're calling it. We're calling it for Jalen Carter. Get your Lions picks ready to go. Jalen Carter is going to the Seattle Seahawks. And again, I don't think anything here is surprising.